Thanks, Nick. Hi, my name is Cooper Lutz, and I'm a cloud specialist here with Ahead. And today I want to take the opportunity to really introduce you to what we've developed here internally at Ahead, which we refer to as a solution called Automation Hub. Today I want to go through a little bit more conceptually what Automation Hub is, the reason that we've kind of developed and built this solution, and really just dig into a little bit more of the technical details around the actual Automation Hub solution. And I'd like to start first by kind of giving you a frame of reference of really where this idea came from, kind of thinking about this concept of automating what we as technology professionals are doing on a daily basis. Something we're all very familiar with is kind of this concept of, provisioning or updating configurations, or just the ongoing processes that we're actually modifying our technology stacks on an ongoing basis. And really, kind of thinking this through something, just kind of a net new application or service being developed, or going through that actual provisioning process of building a server as we pass these requests back and forth through the various different teams within our organization. It's going to start through the server team and go through the backup team, make sure that we're applying the backup, adding this, this new server to our backup systems and solutions, making sure that we have the effective monitoring in place, all to get this system or this server back to our development team, our applications teams, or our business users, so that they can then build their application or platform on top of these systems. And really what we notice is just going through this process of, sometimes it might be an actual paper format of a form or a digital form that we're going through. In many cases, it turns into emails, or more recently, maybe just an actual chat message where we're actually passing the appropriate IP information or the SLAs that we need to apply from a backup perspective. All of these things are just very disparate in the way that we're actually handling them. And it's taking up a lot of our time internally to gather the effective information that we, as either the networking team or the server team or the security team, really whatever team we're a part of, it's taking us a lot of time to gather the appropriate details so that we can build the system according to the proper specs. So if we think about this kind of from an end-to-end provisioning process perspective, we start with the concept of just a developer who wants let's say a bare bones server, and on this server, all they need is a simple web application that they can deploy their code to. Or in some cases, it might be a third-party solution that we actually need to install on top of a server. So we're waiting to give this system back to that application team. But from an end-to-end process perspective, what we really find is a lot of hurry up and wait, where that system is going through each of the different teams. Requirements might be changing on an ongoing basis. We're looking at the specs provided by that third party, or we're trying to evolve based on what the development team is working on. And at the end of the day, this is eating up a lot of time for us to actually get a successful build back to those teams so that the business can then ultimately receive the value that we are hoping to gain out of this new application. And so what we find is you have a lot of just time lag throughout this process. Information is inaccurate at many times. We might get all the way to the security team for their final approval for this actual system, only to find out that we have compliance requirements and we need to go back and change the way that we're actually handling the monitoring, or we need to introduce a new tool or feature. So really what we see and what we have found with many of the other organizations that we here at Ahead work with is that overall end-to-end process of something as simple as a server build, onboarding a new application can take days, weeks, and sometimes even months for much more complex builds, or if we're introducing this concept of actually, rebuilding or redoing the way we normally go throughout these procedures along that way. So what we have kind of thought about is, what if we, within our individual domains of expertise, were able to drive more of a siloed efficiency, to the point where the networking team is able to really focus on their primary responsibilities and level of expertise. They're going to have involvement in things like a server build, even though on a day-to-day basis, they're more focused on maintaining our switches and routers and making sure that all of our sites have the appropriate connectivity. But how can we make our processes more effective? And how can we introduce new technologies to actually create efficiencies between all of these different teams, and really think about it more from an automated, modularized process of actually building or updating or maintaining all of these systems that we're responsible for. And so we've kind of put together a number of different observations that we found just in this specific provisioning process use case. These issues or challenges can really vary completely from, security requirements not being appropriately met, from the actual configurations on our servers varying, from the operating systems not being kept up to date, or we have two builds with completely different versions of the operating system. Another huge thing is just this concept of the actual size of the systems that we're building or providing back to our applications or development or any of our teams outside of the core technology group. And so we really found, how can we take these challenges and issues and really introduce a tool set, a feature within the overall ecosystem of our technology stack, something that isn't requiring us to change all of our hypervisors or all of our operating systems or all of our core technologies, but how can we create a way to remove all of these challenges and utilize all of the investments that we've already made in our core technology? And so the things that we're trying to address here are ultimately, how can we reduce the number of manual steps in this process? How can we reduce the number of emails that are being sent, or chats, or even the different meetings that might need to take place to get a system built or to maintain an upgrade? How can we improve the reliability so we have better SLAs and we have appropriate configuration every single time? It's something that's standardized and extremely repeatable. And another huge one is just this concept of time to market. How can we drive down the overall time it takes for us as the internal technologists to actually develop and deliver these solutions back to our internal teams? Improving visibility overall is a huge concept to make sure that we have more transparency, not only from a process, a time, an actual technical configuration perspective, but another huge concept for the business is just improving visibility and our level of understanding of the cost implications of all of these configurations within our environment. And last but not least is just the overall satisfaction to our end users, regardless of what teams we're delivering these systems to or maintaining these systems for. How can we improve their overall satisfaction so they have more capabilities or more technologies at their fingertips within our organization so they can truly innovate or create more solve more complex problems that we're all facing on a day-to-day basis within our organizations. So we've taken that concept of understanding how we can drive more efficiencies, make our processes more efficient, increase the actual value that we're providing back to our end users or our business as a whole, understanding that we don't want to make massive amounts of investment in changing our entire technology stack. And we created this concept of taking a more cloud or tool set agnostic approach to how we solve for automation within our entire ecosystem. And that's really how we've approached our concept of Automation Hub. And we first start by this concept that we really want to solve not only for the public cloud ecosystem, not only for our existing private cloud ecosystem, but how can we even extend this to these new edge computing platforms, IoT, software as a service. Our goal at the end of the day is to solve for really across our entire technical landscape. How can we improve automation, improve our standards of configuration, decrease the time that it takes for us to maintain these systems, and just create a more flexible platform that we can actually utilize to maintain and deliver solutions back to the business. And that's a big point that we want to make in this concept of Automation Hub. Our concept of cloud should be thought about really from a private cloud perspective, a public cloud perspective. This concept of cloud, we're really taking to any location that we are providing technology services to our internal or external users. So let's take a look at, kind of the behind the scenes architecture solution that we've put together for our Automation Hub. And I think this does a really great job of showing, what we're actually utilizing behind the scenes or the overall workflow in a traditional provisioning process or upgrade process. But I think one of the big things to notice is you'll find even off on the right-hand side, we have this concept of AWS, Azure, GCP, and VMware all being provisioned to through a single platform or a single workflow within our automation architecture. And really, that's one of the biggest concepts that we wanted to develop in this Automation Hub feature set and capability. Regardless of what tool set you're using in each one of these different boxes, be it Jenkins or Azure DevOps for our CI/CD pipelining capabilities, Puppet, Chef, Ansible for configuration management. Regardless of what tool we're actually using in these different categories, we want to bring them all together. We want to reduce the amount of tool sprawl or reduce the amount of overlap that we have between these different orchestration platforms or configuration platforms, and really just create a more efficient and effective solution. And this really goes back from a technical perspective. It really goes back to Nick's session earlier where he went through infrastructure as code, because behind the scenes in each one of these different categories, you'll see there in the middle as we're doing pre-deployed integrations or building out virtual machines or Kubernetes. All of this behind the scenes is being done via infrastructure as code. And that's one of the main things that we kind of built out from an Automation Hub perspective. Every configuration, every security tool that we're bringing into the fold, or every time we're applying backup, Everything is being done via infrastructure as code within each native tool set. And we're trying to bring all of these solutions together and fully integrate them so that from the beginning of a provisioning process, just presenting that form to our end users where they have the ability to go out and request a new Azure virtual machine, all the way through our CI/CD process that is deploying the application on top of that virtual machine, our Terraform infrastructure as code that is, actually the language that the code is written in to deploy that virtual machine, and the chef configuration that is being applied on top of that host layer to actually handle those host layer configurations. Everything is being done via one common workflow and one standard process, and we can create additional versions of this virtual machine or create our standard tools or our standard builds all in one single concept. So let's move on to kind of the concept of the different capabilities and services that we want to bring into an automation hub solution. So the first concept is the idea of creating these different blueprints for our actual catalog of services. What we're trying to accomplish here is, if I take the idea of building a virtual machine, all of the different steps in that process, be it different configuration guides or deployment guides that I might be utilizing today, how do I bring all of them into a simplified format where I essentially am able to plug in parameters for my IP address or the actual storage array that I want to attach to, and bake them all into a single blueprint that I can use repeatedly. So no matter if I'm creating one virtual machine or 20 virtual machines, there should be consistency in the way that that build is going through our internal deployment process. And if we think about how we're taking those actual blueprints or those services available, as we automate each additional configuration or each additional component in all of these different processes, we're able to create essentially these different building blocks. So in some cases, I might need to integrate with a firewall, maybe create a new firewall rule. Maybe I need to attach application performance monitoring on top of this application or system that I'm creating. All of these different components or solutions are now becoming different services or blueprints within my catalog of internal capabilities, and I'm easily able to automate each different component and have that flexible or modular approach in terms of bringing on new services. So now if I'm creating a cloud hosted virtual machine, I can still rely on a lot of the same automation blueprints that I've developed in the past, but I need to modify to now make sure that I'm utilizing the Azure ecosystem as opposed to my VMware environment. And so that's really one of the big things here, is just that modular, flexible approach that we're able to take into consideration for all of these different solutions. And here we have kind of a more in-depth build out of all of the different steps that we might go through in that process. It's really coming down to taking, again, all of those different configuration standards or our internal security standards, and understanding which different variables we can modify or present back to an end user in an automated format, and then go throughout that process and implement them all via a Terraform or a Chef, all via infrastructure as code. And then we get to those more complex blueprints. So now that I have the ability to create a virtual machine, I have the ability to install a web application framework on top of that virtual machine. I have the ability to deploy the application code. I can install my database on top of another virtual machine and bring together a full architecture for any additional application team or internal business users who might need to utilize the same architecture or a very similar solution. And I'm now able to do something as simple as just modifying the application name or just the project name that this is going to be applied to. And I have the same exact configuration built out for that entire stack of applications. And here, really, that concept of that overall provisioning process, that end-to-end procedure that might take a few months of working with the networking team, the security team, the virtual, the virtualization team, the applications teams. Everybody has had a stake in developing this solution. We're all maintaining our appropriate parts, but we've been able to bring them all together and create an automated way of developing or deploying additional interior stacks for additional use cases that we might find within the environment or within our organization. And the last thing that I definitely wanted to make sure that we hit on from more of the process or more of those ongoing concepts. Provisioning in some cases might not be something that we're doing continuously. We might have 200 servers that we need to build this month, or we might have one server that we need to build this entire year. It just depends. So really, we've taken this concept of the overall just automation hub and thought about it more from the process or the ongoing administration and maintenance side of things as well. And to give you kind of a little bit of an idea from the end-to-end process side of things, this could really entail not only provisioning new services, but in some cases we might be updating an IP address where we're going to go through the our IPAM system and actually grabbing a new IP address or making a configuration change to what type of monitoring we have in place. All of these different processes or ongoing maintenance of those systems can be thought about from an automation hub perspective as well. The more we're able to automate those processes that we're seeing on an ongoing basis, or those repeatable things that we need to go through the environment and make changes to, we have the ability to just expand our capabilities and build on top of the overall automation hub platform for our particular solution or our particular technical needs. So I'd like to take a moment to just give you a little bit more of a look into the actual automation hub solution that we've developed. And I think one of the best things to show is just the overall automation hub portal. So here I'm basically logging into our particular ServiceNow instance. Everything that's being done from an automation hub perspective is essentially front-ended by ServiceNow. So I'm presented as an end user, as an application user, really anybody who's coming in to essentially consume technology services. I'm coming into this portal and I have the ability to go through essentially our catalog of blueprints or application stacks, all of these different configuration items that we've developed and automated in a single easy to consume platform. So here, for instance, I can go in and create a single virtual machine, just very standard common virtual machine. Kind of through our discussions today, But you'll see here I have all of these particular parameters identified. And the thought process behind this is, as the virtualization team or those who are really our core server administrators, what are all of the different pieces of information or all of those different parameters that would go into actually deploying a new virtual machine? Some things might be presented back as configurable. I might allow you to input how many actual cores you want in this system. I might allow you to be more flexible in the amount of memory that we're going to provide on this system. I could simplify this and only present to you small, medium, and large. And on the back end, you don't actually know the amount of cores or the amount of memory that are available in this system. But beyond that, more of the control of the actual configuration or that compute instance. I also have the ability to think about, is this a temporary system? If we're just going to lease you this system, how many days do you need it for? If it's just for testing purposes, we want to make sure that we're going back and removing this system once you're done with your testing. So as opposed to having all of these unknown virtual machines out in our environment, I'm sure we all have them, just this concept of, well, we're not really sure what it does, but we're unsure about removing it, or we just don't touch it at this point. By having everything built into this automation hub solution, I have the ability to make sure that once this system is provisioned, in 8 days, I'll have another automation process that will kick off and actually remove or suspend or just check with an end user before it actually completely removes the system and it's no longer taking up our additional capacity or our already provided resources. But overall, to kind of get back to just this form in particular, you'll see here I'm going to say that I only want one system to be deployed today. I can also get a drop down that allows me to determine whether or not this is a system that is going to include a particular compliance framework for the actual data that's on this system. So it might be HIPAA data that I have on this virtual machine that I expect to build. So I want to make sure that those specific HIPAA blueprints or those solutions that we've developed that are specifically meant to be HIPAA compliant are utilized when this deployment happens. And from here, if I try to deploy without an operating system, I will get an error message. But once I check the actual operating system, from here I'll just get a nice notification that my request has been submitted. Behind the scenes is really where everything happens, from the actual infrastructure as code that's deploying the system. It's going to store a ticket that is showing me how long this system is available for. And that's really one of the biggest components here, is just the overall power of the information that we're able to bring into a common solution. And you'll see here kind of the concept of even presenting different platforms in a single catalog of services. I can even have the ability to integrate actual pricing estimates for a particular solution that I might be thinking about deploying, where I'm integrating directly with cloud providers' APIs. If I go back here to the overall catalog of services, I can also think about just the concept of, well, I might not want to present these different services or what platform is actually being utilized. If an end user just wants a virtual machine or just wants a blank database, I might not necessarily want them to worry about where that's deployed, or they might not necessarily care. So ultimately, I have the ability to just present back a a Red Hat virtual machine, or a database server. All of these different systems could just be essentially developed in a manner that makes more sense for your environment or for the way that you want your end users to be consuming these different technical services. And that is really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make it more flexible. As you scale into more of a hybrid cloud situation, or as you expand the different services that you're utilizing, you might really not want end users to worry about all of the behind the scenes solutions that's happening. I can even get much more complex in the way that I'm delivering these services back. For developers in particular, I might have the developers on an ongoing basis requesting just a standard Kubernetes environment. Maybe it's just a GKE environment and they want to deploy a .NET application. If this is a common request in my application, or from my application developers, in this scenario, I might be able to make it as simple as a submit button. I'm not even going to ask them any particular parameters. On the back end, I am going to generate a name. I'm going to generate a cluster. I'm going to implement an actual just a starting .NET application. I can create a new Git repository for them all automatically. And then I can just inform my end user that their new application or their new project is ready for them to develop. And it can be just as simple as that. I can really customize how much information I want to gather or how little information I want to gather to make that experience more simple for our technology consumers. And that is, again, just really how we're trying to build this platform. We want it to be flexible. We want it to use our common services. We want it to, have the ability to integrate with all of the different public cloud providers, or private cloud ecosystem, different configuration management tools. We want it to be as flexible as possible so that it's not forcing us to change all of the different tool sets and all of the different solutions that we've already developed. How can we maximize those investments we've already made and start to really think about them from a more automated fashion and really just make things more efficient as we're deploying them or maintaining them, or really just anything within our okay. And with that, I think I will take the opportunity to see if anybody has just any general questions. I think there's so much more behind this solution. What I really wanted to get across today is this concept that our automation hub solution is meant to be, kind of an augmentation of what you're utilizing today within your existing portfolio of technical solutions or applications. It's meant to be flexible. It's meant to be customizable for the way that you want your technical consumers to consume the different services that you're providing back to them. And really the goal of it is to just make things more efficient, to make them more effective, to make them more secure, and to reduce the overall burden that these technical solutions have on us as the administrators or the technologists. So thank you very much for your time today, and I will take any questions with that.
Can you hear me, Cooper?
Hello. I can hear you.
All right. Hey, everyone. All right. We've got Cooper and I have got to work on our virtual transitions here in this new crazy world we're in. But thanks everyone for bearing through us as we kind of navigate this. And yeah, excited to take some questions. We got a whole bunch here, Cooper, in the chat. So let me kind of scroll back through here. So I think the first one, I don't know how we sort of prompt these as answered, but yeah. So Faisal Afzal asks, can we leverage Ansible infrastructure instead of using Terraform? I think that came up during my session there. So yeah, absolutely. I think you probably saw it, probably got answered in Cooper's session that sort of followed mine. But essentially, yeah, I mean, Ansible we definitely see as a piece of the architecture. Maybe it fulfills the IaaS OS configuration management piece. That's certainly possible. Or it can be used for some of the data operations, can be used for some of the infrastructure builds. Really depends. I think you asked in your second question, yeah, around the declarative model. You sort of have to define, what you get with Terraform is your entire infrastructure is stored as code. So we have like full state management basically there. And then we go and we change the code, and Terraform can hand off smoothly to Ansible to do certain things that it's better at. So I think that's just a case of, as you saw with Cooper in the architecture, that's a best of breed scenario there, where we would, yeah, absolutely advocate for both options. I don't see any concerns there. Cooper, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I know I've ran into this a couple times because your Ansible can actually deploy and handle some provisioning of your Azure resources, for instance. And I know they're introducing the concept of like drift detection and things as well. Honestly, I don't see it used all that often, and it really comes down to kind of that concept of like, how am I ultimately going to manage my infrastructure as code? The Terraform, the Azure native, the AWS native, GCP native, whatever. All of those types of solutions, your process is essentially getting to that model of any change that I make is going to be made in code. I don't even necessarily need to worry about drift if I get down to the concept of my only way of provisioning is via a service account, service principal. Nobody can go in and actually modify a service without deploying infrastructure as code. I don't even need drift detection, in many of those cases. And it's really kind of that gray area in terms of like how much manual interaction or intervention do we want our administrators to actually have in this environment? That a lot of times is what I think drives our approach and the types of tools that we're putting in place to manage. Very long-winded answer. It is honestly very complex because we have all these different options, but that's generally the route that I want to ultimately get to. That is the perfect end state. Where I'm never actually logging into the portal and making a change in production against any of my services.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would add there is maybe understand the use cases first of all. So we would sort of map those out, decide, okay, what are we trying to provide up to our consumers of IT? And, certainly at Ahead, we do that with a lot of clients. So we just go through that exercise with you is an option, I think I think we answered your question there, but definitely reach out further, if there's other pieces you want to know around it. The next part there, so Tom Nagel. Hey, Tom, good to see you. Thanks for joining. The cost estimation policy, Terraform Cloud or Terraform Enterprise. Yeah, it's on both of those. So it's available. It's a licensed feature. So it's not, so it's part of the business program for Terraform Cloud and Terraform Enterprise. But yeah, it's available in both, whether you use the SaaS model or kind of the do-it-yourself model. I think there's another one related to my session, Cooper, is Integration Hub on the modern automation architecture. Yeah, I guess this applies to yours too. Slide the ServiceNow Integration Hub. Yeah, it absolutely is. When we exit ServiceNow, we sort of took a new, Cooper, myself, and a number of the ServiceNow team and the cloud teams that had. We really entered 2020 trying to think about, customers have been struggling with this gluing all these pieces together, all these different tools, and how do we ultimately come up with a much more simplified framework around this? And one of the key components of that was, when do I present something in ServiceNow? how do I make it easy to execute, from a catalog item there? And then how do I talk back to ServiceNow downstream from whether it's Terraform, ARM templates, VMware, Google, Azure, AWS, whatever it is. And so, yeah, we settled on Integration Hub. We thought it's a very fantastic feature that ServiceNow added in recent years. And yeah, we use the spokes. We use pre-built spokes wherever possible, and we create custom spokes where those don't exist. And so it also allows us to very quickly accelerate and integrate, customers' ServiceNow environments. So huge fans of, ServiceNow. Seems like they're on the same track. They want to simplify. They don't want to sort of own every component of the stack engine downstream, which makes sense. The cloud teams don't want ServiceNow in there. It creates too much work across both teams and handoffs and complexity. The goal is request it through ServiceNow, make that form intuitive, get the business logic in there, and let the technical teams do their automation tasks downstream, whether it's Puppet, Chef, Ansible, Terraform, ARM, AWS, CloudFormation, Yeah, so I think that makes sense. Could you want to take the next one? Yeah, what is the best way to use infrastructure as code with Azure when you have a non-public on-prem GitHub Enterprise instance? Do you want me to take it?
There's really nothing that's going to prevent you from utilizing your infrastructure as code with a private, or on-prem version of GitHub. I think some of the things that you'll see is just the concept of how you're handling pipelining. And there's a lot of different options, really. So if I think about from a Terraform perspective, I can utilize Terraform Enterprise, where it's going to have that on-premises hosted version of the Terraform orchestration to actually connect out to my on-prem GitHub Enterprise. No issues there whatsoever. Still same integrations. It's just not publicly hosted. And then there's also, from a Jenkins perspective, Jenkins X, I have the ability to host my own. Azure DevOps even has actually Azure DevOps and GitHub, given that they're kind of blending the two, I think as we're all starting to see, they both have the concept of a hosted runtime worker, or I think their names kind of differ, but it's essentially the hosted orchestration that I can run my own VM privately in my own infrastructure. So from like a pipelining perspective, to actually orchestrate my infrastructure as code, no problem. From storing my infrastructure as code, no problem whatsoever. It's a little bit different than you would normally approach just via the public version of GitHub, but you shouldn't have any problems whatsoever, Stephen.
Yeah, no issues. Okay. Next question. Will the slides from the presentation be available after the session for download? So we will check in with our marketing gurus here and see how they're making that available. Otherwise, if you're already a head customer, just reach out to your client director. We absolutely can get those to you. We can PDF them up and absolutely share them. I think they tell the story really well, and we've built a lot of that with customers over time. So I think I'm happy to share. Do you maintain, Scott Morse, do you maintain the stack engine? And if so, where is that hosted? You want to take that one, Cooper?
Go for it.
We take that. Yeah. So I think you're referring to there is the elements on the right from Automation Hub. So they're still the tools you use. So it's still going to be Terraform. It's still going to be things like vRealize Orchestrator, vRealize Automation for on-prem. The stack engine isn't a product. It's a choice of product that's out there. It's really the concept of how do you build the modules, assemble the stacks, and present them. But it's the same tools you're probably using today. And that was our goal as we also built this out. You've probably got the tools already in a lot of cases. We just need to assemble them in the right way. And so then you have a process of your team builds, develops the code, tests it, releases it, out into the wild. So, I think, when you say where's it hosted, it's going to be a combination of public and on-prem locations, but it's more about let's look at your use case. Let's pick the right stack engine of tools. Let's pick the right technical orchestrator for your scenario. Let's decide if you present it into ServiceNow. Let's decide if you've got Jenkins or Azure DevOps. And we sort of glue them all together, give you a framework every time you want to create a new service it's very easy to do so. Donald Smith, of the infrastructure stacks, what do you find to be the most difficult to automate provisioning? I think we'll both have a stab at this one. So I'll let Cooper go first if he's got one, and then I'll sort of jump in with my example.
Quite honestly, I mean, if we look at some of the bigger players, and I assume by infrastructure stacks, you're kind of speaking to a lot of our private cloud and public cloud solutions. VMware, GCP, AWS, Azure, those are the kind of platforms that we work with primarily. Really, every single one of them is very much working toward making it simpler to automate the provisioning process. They're opening up APIs, they're developing more capabilities to allow you to automate their processes and work with their technologies. I have a hard time saying that I really find any of them challenging. It's not challenging from like, I don't want to pick on any one of them, but if I pick on GCP, for instance, that's probably fair because GCP as a whole is great for automating the provisioning process and working with their APIs. They're newer, so their features are being released. They're still being released. They're still being developed. They don't have as many as the platform as a service solutions as the other two big cloud providers. So that's the challenge usually, is keeping up with the pace of how they're releasing a new platform as a service or just a service on their platform as a whole. Keeping up with those, it usually takes a little bit of time. So they'll add, a new capability, a new service that I can now consume in GCP. It might take a month, it might take a couple weeks before I can actually integrate with that API, have a Terraform module being developed. It's more that than challenge with actually interacting with the platforms themselves that I run into. And that's just kind of a given, quite honestly. They're all operating and innovating so quickly. It's just kind of a chicken and egg situation that we're trying to keep up with. I don't quite honestly work with many of the other kind of big cloud providers as well. But if we kind of think of like Oracle Cloud or Alibaba Cloud, a lot of them also have, from a Terraform perspective in particular, they have providers available. They're all being developed. They're all, driven by not only HashiCorp, but also the community. So they're trying to keep up with those public cloud providers. But again, you're going to see features or functionality released quicker with the big three cloud providers than you are with the other cloud providers. It's just kind of part of the way this whole thing works. But Nick, anything from your perspective?
Yeah, I would just say probably even I think Kuba hit a lot of the detail there. I would say at a very high level, it takes a lot longer to automate on-prem VM builds than it takes to automate public cloud services. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast, right? Public cloud, we deal with, to Cooper's point, there's Amazon, Microsoft, and Google keep their APIs up to date very well. We've obviously seen a lot of advancements with VMware and the SDDC constructs that have come in over the last 3 to 5 years here. But yeah, I would just say it still takes longer. I think public cloud has just been built around this model from the get-go. And on-prem, unless all of our tools and technologies are available from a common set like that, where something like Terraform can talk into it with all its provisioners, which is also growing. Hashi's investing significantly on-prem as well. I would say that's probably the short version there. The good thing is, once you say, hey, I want to do Kubernetes stack, or I want to do Azure App Service, Azure SQL, whatever these other pieces are, once you know how to do one of those things, just add in another one is quite easy to the stack. It's more just getting into the concept of adopting infrastructure as code, first of all, that I think is so important. In fact, I'm going to jump to a question because I think it kind of dovetails into that. So do you have any additional online resources to recommend for reviewing what the transition of operational responsibilities to this modern future of IT looks like? Yeah, so we certainly are continuing to push out content. So I would say keep an eye on the Think Ahead resources. So thinkahead.com, there's our sort of IO resources hub there where we put just tons of information out. There's videos and blog posts and things there. We do have a white paper coming out. I'd like to say it'll be out, in the next, 3 to 4 weeks, ideally. So that will get published, and watch social media for when that comes out. So I think that's critical. I think it's, have a conversation. We can talk through some of the stuff too with your client director, and we can obviously get conversations too. But yeah, we're trying to put as much out publicly. If Cooper and I spend a lot of time talking to customers about this. If there's one thing top of our mind, is how do teams transform into this new model? What does your CCOE look like? We've got some fantastic customers that have built their teams out and have gone through this transition that we learn from. We've seen customers struggle with it too. I think, that leads me to education, such a big piece of this, to the point of my session early on, adopting very, very early, integrating, if you immediately start your adoption of Azure and AWS and you're building everything in the portal versus immediately adopting infrastructure as code, you're going to find it a lot easier as you grow out your environment, that you've adopted the new mindset. So those are some of the things that I would say there. Cooper, you want to weigh in on that? I know you're passionate about this topic too. So, team transformation.
Yeah, no, I think shameless plug for some of the stuff that Nick and I have actually put out there. I think it's on our website about kind of our enterprise skills and cloud community of excellence concept. I mean, it's probably the bigger challenge in a lot of these scenarios is just transitioning how we think of ourselves as professionals in kind of this modern cloud, if you will, era. And, really what it comes down to, especially as we're talking about infrastructure as code, I mean, if I think about as a developer, am I developing my infrastructure as code, or am I having, kind of the infrastructure team develop the infrastructure as code, and then the developers are handling the application code? We're all kind of coding at this point. We just have different versions of code, where some code is more focused on kind of the infrastructure side or the application side. It's very confusing, quite honestly. And I think that's the part that I kind of like, is because we start to all work together. We're working in common languages and formats, and we're all kind of working toward that same goal from an automation and a coding perspective. There's a lot of complexities. There's so much more that we could go into on that topic, because it is one of the more challenging things. But yeah, definitely like education, focusing, having common goals, common initiatives, even common languages that we're using from a infrastructure as code perspective. Those are really the big things that I would think about.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, definitely love to talk to you more about it. We've only got just over 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try to go through these pretty quick. We've got a few pages of questions here I didn't realize, so let me try to get very quick answers, and hopefully we can follow up with you. How do we mix cloud and on-prem infrastructure for configuration, because builds will be different? That's where the best of breed comes in. So when we work with customers, we look at the stack engine. We say, this is the configuration for on-prem. This is the configuration for public cloud, where maybe in public cloud we're deploying an ARM template, or we're using Terraform or something. Maybe on-prem we're using vRealize automation as an example. That's where we sort of mix those options there. But ultimately, we do try to align things like the operating system, monitoring tools, patching, align as much as we can. And where it's different, just let the stack engine take care of that. You just build that into your automation, and it's okay if it's different, but align as much as possible so we don't have too much rework. Sanjeev Sharma, it appears a lot of coding behind the scene. How does this automation fit into low code? That's interesting, because I think we are seeing a rise in Power Apps, on the Microsoft side, a lot of these other low code platforms. vRealize Orchestrator is still a low code platform for on-prem, so we do use that pretty extensively for on-prem automation. Our goal is, if something exists and we can just drag and drop it in and connect it, we're going to do that first before we code anything. Us actually coding the REST API calls and things to services is a last resort. And we also do a lot of tagging now. We'll tag services and then have the operational tools just read the tag. So now you've only built one automation. You can tag the service with a whole bunch of metadata, and then the operation tools just pick up the metadata. We do that with patching. There can be like phases and groups for patch windows, and then you come in and you pick up the patch window, and it goes into, say, Azure Update Management, SCCM, Ansible, and Satellite. Work in some of those ways too. So that's there. I've got a follow on there. Let me just quickly skim through here. Ansible can be used as a bridging tool. We could follow up on that for sure. It's a pretty longer question we got time for. Sorry, go, Cooper. Did you find another one there?
Jim asks, when you are automating, how do you guarantee the architecture you are putting together is the best design for the cloud, not just doing lift and shift, but designing for a cost-efficient cloud design for the application you are running?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Overall, if I think about the way I'm building my infrastructure as code, let's pick an Azure SQL and an Azure web app, just standard app tier, database tier. When I'm going through and thinking about what does the code need to look like to build both of those services, I don't want to think about kind of the bare minimum to get it running. If you go out and look at I wish I could pull it up quickly, but if you go out and look at all of the parameters that I can plug in or configure just for an Azure web app, I think there's probably like 100 of them, if I'm not mistaken. There are so many different switches and things that I can ultimately build. And that comes down to, okay, let's take a step back and determine what is our standard configuration for an Azure web app. What are all of those switches that we need to rely on? And those now become things that are part of, if I'm using Terraform, that's part of my provider, that's part of my standard template that I'm building out. And that's not something that I'm allowing a developer or somebody else to actually modify. Let's call it the, trying to pick on something like the backup policy of my Azure web app. I'm not allowing that to be changed. You have to follow that portion, but you can change the name all you want. You can change the deployment slots. You can change all of these different pieces. So mapping my standards to that infrastructure as code template and kind of going through more of that design effort, that's the way that we want to think about it. Hope that helps.
Yeah, totally agree. I think just to kind of tie off here, I'm just trying to find that question again. Yeah, I think the other thing is just planning up front. We do a lot of pricing calculator exercises too to help us like really think through the right architecture, because sometimes the fanciest shiny architecture might cost a lot more. And I think people need to understand those trade-offs and security and recovery trade-offs, that you're making as well. I've got time. I'm going to do one last one. Yeah, and apologies, we're sort of running on time here. Is the head automation hub ran on an on-prem server? Does it talk to ServiceNow public API? Yeah, so again, it's a combination of tools, just to be clear. It's a framework. The ServiceNow component, though, is definitely, it's running on your ServiceNow environment that you have. And essentially, we push an update set in there. We're not doing any custom module. We do put like custom spokes into Integration Hub and some things. But our goal was we didn't want anything to break as you update ServiceNow throughout its lifecycle. So we're really using ServiceNow native for the front end portion of things. And then the downstream portion really depends on the tools. And with 5 seconds left, I'm going to wrap up here, and I guess just say thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Cooper, and we'll work everyone on our virtual conferencing. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Cooper. Thank you, Nick. Just like we did yesterday, we're going to take a break now until 2 p.m. Eastern, at which time we'll hear from Stephen Aiello and Logan Wilcox of the AHEAD security practice on the always lingering topic of cloud security. Then we're going to hear from Tim Peterson, CIO at a valued client of ours, Xcel Energy, and a few of his team members about their own cloud journey. So we'll see you back then.